Hi, everyone. Thanks for watching. We have a real interesting subject tonight, a little bit different, and something that is personally relevant to me as well. So hang tight, and we'll be back to talk about post-traumatic growth and also a potential link between trauma and the paranormal with Jaci and Bill Kousoulas. Jaci, Bill, thanks for joining me.
Hi, Susie. Thanks for having us.
Hi,
Yeah,
Susie.
my pleasure. So, off the bat, before we get too far into your research and your books, I am always very curious about couples that are involved in the paranormal together. Were you both already interested in the paranormal when you met, or did that develop with the relationship?
What do you think, honey?
Well, I've always been interested in the paranormal, and I think that you probably were too because of the Mothman prophecy, which was very paranormal and other stuff. So yeah, I think we're both interested in it before we met.
That's fair. Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. So can you give a little bit background on your book, which I am currently in the middle of reading?
Sure. So Jaci was talking about, our backgrounds with, to answer your question. And I'm somebody who's been into the paranormal really my whole life. But I kind of got away from it because life gets interesting and busy and crazy and all these different things and career and family and all this. In my early 30s, I saw the Mothman Prophecies movie just on a whim. And I'd really been kind of away from the paranormal for a little while. Not totally, but not totally into it either. And I saw the movie and it really spoke to me. And I think what really spoke to me, besides the bizarre stuff that happens in the movie, was at the end of it, when they talked about this was based upon a bridge disaster and events that happened in Point Pleasant, West Virginia in 1966 and 1967. And the couple things that resonated with me were the weirdness of the movie and the fact that the bridge collapsed in the same year that I was born. And for whatever reasons, those things just really spoke to me. And a few years later, I got John Keel's book, read that. I got the audiobook. I listened to that. I would be embarrassed to tell you how many times I've watched the movie and read the book and listened to the book. I couldn't count them. It's in the hundreds, if not thousands. So it just really grabbed me. And we decided to visit Point Pleasant in 2016. We met Carolyn Harris, who ran the Mothman Diner, and Jeff Wamsley, who runs the Mothman Museum, and a guy by the name of Mark Griffith. And long story short, it became a home away from home. And as much as we really enjoyed our time with Carolyn, she passed away before we got a chance to go back to see her, but she gave us such a sense of belonging in Point Pleasant that we kept going back. And after 4 or 5 years of going back, we decided to write a book about the bridge disaster in which Carolyn lost her 2-year-old son and her first husband. And it just had a profound effect upon the community of Point Pleasant and on us.
Was it going there and talking to the local people that kind of gave you the idea and helped you kind of put things together?
What do you think?
Well, sort of, but it was actually my idea for the actual topic of the book. But Carolyn is the one that inspired us to write the book in Point Pleasant, I think. But the idea came to me to write a book about trauma or paranormal or trauma and like the Mothman thing and post-traumatic growth. So that's kind of how the bridge disaster and all of the paranormal stuff came up for the topic, because we literally wanted to write it on Carolyn's life instead. Bill wanted to do that. And since she had passed away, then the idea came to me to do that instead, because that way we could combine all of the interests that we had in Point Pleasant and the Ohio River Valley, because we have interest So we were able to do it that way. I think that's answering the question.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
So one of the things that has kind of struck me about the personal experiences in the book is, I realize I am from not only a different part of the country as these people are, but also a different generation. And the way they talked about their trauma was almost like jarring to me, like the attitude. And this from like watching, old TV shows, that the attitude was very different um in the 60s and 70s than it is today. But it was very much like, oh, yep, this just happened, I have to deal with it. Let's, push it aside. And was that something that you guys felt as well, or is that that personal to me? Because that was very, very jarring to me, just to hear it from individuals giving their firsthand experiences.
So when you ask that question, Susie, I'm kind of going back in my head to the interviews that we conducted, and the ones that jump out to me would be Linda Lane and Susan Sayer. And if you're not all the way through the book, I don't know if you've read Marva Bailey yet, but all three of them said things along those lines. They didn't have counselors. They didn't have grief therapy. They didn't have what we have at our disposal today, where we break a shoelace and we can go talk to somebody about it. They had this major disaster happen in this small community, and a really big proportion of folks there, 46 people drowned or died in the Silver Bridge disaster, and there are only 4,000 people in town. So it had a profound effect upon the lives of these people. But yeah, I mean, I think about some of the challenges that I've faced in my life. Nothing as profound or as powerful as what they went through, but I have help. I have people I can go talk to, and they did have a good, strong sense of community, but they didn't have psychologists. They didn't have psychiatrists. They didn't have grief counseling. So that, yeah, was very, when you talk about, Harriet talked about in her interview that just pull yourself up by the bootstraps is the West Virginia mantra. And I get that, but wow, powerful disaster.
Yeah, and to your point, that was another takeaway for me, is that community really did come together through that. I'm from a town that was about population 7,000, maybe, and once in a while you'd have a death in town, one, and it would have a huge impact. So I can't imagine 46, and my town was almost twice as big.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Susan Sayer mentioned that she remembered the day when they went in and took out, I can't think of I feel really bad because I can't think of her name now. Kathy Bias, when they took her desk out. And she said it was really, really sad. It was really sad. And they all watched this desk going out of the room, That's just how things were done back then. To me, it just seems unreal. And then the other thing that seemed really kind of unreal to me was, and this is something I never heard before and I've not heard it since, was Charlene Westwood said that one of the teachers, there were two teachers on the bridge. They both passed away. One of them was on the way to the hospital to actually give birth to a baby. And I don't know if that baby's life was considered a fatality or not. Probably not, because they probably didn't do that kind of stuff back then. It wasn't named. And when you look at the list of the names of people that are memorialized, there's not baby such and such.
Yeah, and no one ever talks about that part of it.
Right.
Everyone's so focused on Mothman, and I understand that.
Mm-hmm.
But this particular tragedy is so glossed over, and it gets kind of buried in all of that.
Yeah, she said they had to go back to school, and everybody was just numb. And I know how that, I just lost my mom like 3.5 months ago, whatever. And I told Bill today that I pretty much have been numb. I cried a little bit here and there. And, but that's what happens. People go numb on that kind of stuff, you know, and, we have people we can talk to now. I don't know how they survived. I mean, I really.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So as you're, speaking to these people and, seeing the similarities, the differences, how do you guys relate that to the paranormal experiences?
That's a great question. When we put our research plan together for Bridging the Tragedy, and we contacted the local newspapers in Point Pleasant because we needed more participants. We had a number of people that came forward, but not enough for the study. And so Ashley Wamsley, who is Jeff's daughter, said, why don't you get a hold of Beth Surgent? She's the main person over at the newspaper here in town. Let her know what you're looking to do and, talk to her and see if she'll help you. So we scheduled a phone call with her and I talked to her and she said, we don't mind you guys coming to town doing this. We think it's great, but what you can't do is you can't combine the Silver Bridge disaster with Mothman. You have to be very sensitive to that because this is still very real here. And even though it's been 50 plus years, it's still very serious in our community. And so I assured her that we would not do that. So we came up with 2 research questions. One of them was, what are the dimensions of post-traumatic growth people experienced as a result of going through a bridge disaster? And the second question was, what are the dimensions of post-traumatic growth for people who experienced the high strangeness in the Ohio River Valley in 1966 and 1967? So we did them separately and we asked everybody both questions, but not everybody answered both questions. I think everyone did answer the Silver Bridge, even though we had a couple of people who were in Charleston. So the Silver Bridge was a long way away for them, and they were 7 years old at the time. So it didn't impact them directly like their paranormal experiences did. And then conversely, the people who were in Point Pleasant that we talked to, none of them were actually Mothman witnesses. A couple of them had seen UFOs. A couple of them had some strange things happen, but they didn't really experience the the Mothman or the paranormal activity. So when we conducted the research and did all the questioning and through the interviews, and we went through what's known as coding process, which is where you analyze the data and then put it together, we ended up with dimensions of post-traumatic growth, but they weren't necessarily showing a correlation between Mothman and the bridge disaster, which is exactly what Beth asked us to do. And really, it was the way that we wanted to go with the project anyway. So in that book, we aren't necessarily investigating a relationship between Mothman, UFO, Men in Black, poltergeist activity, and the Silver Bridge disaster. We're not doing that in this. Our next book is going to do exactly that, but not with the Silver Bridge disaster unless we interview somebody who has been, through the Mothman thing. But I'm not sure if I answered your question directly or not, but that was the thoughts behind the process that we followed.
Yeah, I personally feel like that was, the Silver Bridge collapse being related to Mothman kind of got put onto this after the fact. But you've spoken to these people firsthand. Do you feel that they agree with that it was, a theory that came up with afterwards? Or do any of the local people, even if not in the book, do they ever relate that? Or is it completely, out of left field?
Can you speak to that?
I would think that that's out of left field because I don't think people in Point Pleasant combine them at all. Like we were told early on that people would be offended by that, and they were. There's a shirt at one of the stores, and I won't say which store it is in Point Pleasant, that has the Mothman on the bridge. And they really do not like that, because everybody we have spoken to in the study and in Point Pleasant all have said they've never heard of anybody ever seeing Mothman on the bridge before it went down. So, no.
Yeah, I think sometimes things get sensationalized down the road for views or to sell movies.
I'm one that really believes that we talk about Mothman today because of the Silver Bridge disaster.
Mhm.
Not because they were related, but because in folklore, they've been combined. And if you think about having 13 months worth of paranormal activity going on in a community, and then at the very end of that, this horrible disaster happens, which really quiets down the other sightings and other experiences. They didn't go away. They didn't stop happening. But like Jeff Wamsley told us, people didn't want to hear about that stuff anymore. Denny Bellamy told us they didn't want to talk about that crazy thing anymore. We're burying people now. So this is really very real to us. So I think that because the Silver Bridge fell when it did, it really marked the whole Mothman saga with a depth and a gravity that it wouldn't have without the bridge disaster happening. I'm not one that believes Mothman caused the bridge disaster. Excuse me. And I don't know that it necessarily foretold, although that's popular, and I like to think that it foretold and warned the people, but I don't know that that's the case. I do think because the bridge collapsed when it did, that's why Mothman has become so famous.
Can I say one thing about the paranormal link between Mothman and the bridge that nobody can deny, in my opinion? So November 15th, 1966, the very first reported sighting to the police department of Mothman was reported. And then 13 months to the day, the bridge collapsed. There are so many 13s in investigating Mothman of Point Pleasant and Mothman of Chicagoland area, Chicago, Lake Michigan, whatever, that in itself is paranormal, because it's either that or it's highly coincidental that it's exactly 13 months to the day, because you can find 13s and 31s all over Point Pleasant and all over Chicago Mothman sightings and reporting and things. So, I mean, I guess it depends on what people consider paranormal, but in my mind, that's significant in paranormal research when you're finding mirrored number correlations. And we're not making, it's 13 months. It was 13 months to the day. So.
And you've done, I believe it was spirit box activities in Point Pleasant. You had some interesting, I'd call it almost like trickster activity there.
Yeah. Go ahead and talk about it, honey. You like talking about it. Uh-oh. He's muted. So yeah, because the spirit box has taken us all over the place, which is very strange, because we were actually investigating Chicago Mothman stuff in Robinson Woods, because it's near the O'Hare Airport, and it's one of the most haunted woods in Chicagoland, or in Illinois, actually. And the spirit box, we asked what 13 and 31 have to do with any of it, and it said a place to go visit. So when we looked at intersections of 13 and 31 in Illinois and in West Virginia and Ohio, it literally took us to right outside Parkersburg, in a little subdivision, or a little suburb called Vienna. And there's a 13 and 31 there. And all of the stuff that we were getting from that took us to Two Anyway Park, because it was giving us things like keys, box, bones, obelisks. I can't even remember all the different things. I could look back because I have all the transcriptions, and I studied them quite a lot a few years ago. And so where do you go? We go back to Point Pleasant and to get Bill, because he wasn't with us on that. And when we got back to Point Pleasant, we're like, wait a minute. Bones, obelisk, the key, And all these other little things that you're getting. And it's like Toowoomba Way Park was another one, Park. So Toowoomba Way Park is at the point in Point Pleasant where Chief Cornstalk, the 7 remaining bones of his are buried there. And he's got an obelisk in his, for a memorial for him there. And so we did a spirit box session there. And I don't remember a lot of that because I was the one that was receiving that. Bill was asking questions and our friend that was with us was asking questions. And from there, we ended up going to the TNT where we were going to do a spirit box. And I can't remember what led us there. But once we got there, I said, I think we need to be going to Charleston and doing a spirit box there instead, because we can always come back to the TNT anytime. We've been there hundreds of times. And we ended up going to North Charleston and doing spirit box sessions there. And the very first one there was the scariest and shortest we've ever done. And it told us to leave, and we left. And our whole purpose, besides going to go to this one area, was we also wanted to go to the confluence of the river where the bridge collapsed on December 15th in Charleston. And we got there and we literally forgot everything after that. And we went and ate lunch and went straight back to Point Pleasant. And we're like, what? What are we doing? We didn't even go to the confluence. That was the whole point of wanting to go on that visit to Charleston, was to check out the confluence of the 2 rivers there. So there was all kinds of strange stuff on that. On all of those spirit box sessions. And I even remembered one that I had forgotten about before we even took off to go to Parkersburg. We were getting, we did one in the hotel room, and we pulled a tarot card, and I can't remember, but it was significant. And I wish I could remember what it was. And the spirit box talked about a big man, an orator, just like all these other things that later on we learned that Chief Cornstalk stood 6'6" and was an orator. He was like famous for his speaking, so there was all of this too before we even got started with spirit boxes in West Virginia. We had all of these indications. And then there was also stuff about Mason, the family name of Mason. So I did all this tracking back of Mason County, George Mason, and all these other Masons that are linked to Point Pleasant. And it was just like the stuff, when you really start to just take apart all of the data of the spirit boxes, it's definitely some major stuff. And then the dance studio one, that was huge. We really had somebody messing with us. There were 4 of us there at the dance studio, and it was literally messing with each and every one of us, but specifically Bill, because Bill kept getting injured over and over in his spirit box. We had 2 spirit boxes going and 2 people asking questions. So, I mean, we were all getting messed with, but he kept saying, again. And we're like, okay, well, we don't know what you're hearing. You're not telling us. But we got cold also, and we thought that was probably something to do with the bridge going down. So I don't know if that's what you were like keying into, because I don't remember everything I talk about when I talk about the spirit boxes, because we just get too much information. I mean, there's a lot. I have a binder full of transcriptions on those.
Yeah, I remember when we had talked about the Chicago Mothman, and you had talked about kind of the wild goose chase on your spirit box sessions, and also the numerology behind it as well. You briefly touched on that, but from what I remember from Chicago Mothman, that the numbers involved had some pretty big significance as well.
Yeah. There's an awful lot of 13s and 31s. It's like almost unreal. You just keep finding more and more and more of these things. And it's like, yeah. I mean, one of the parks, Oz Park, actually, in Chicagoland area where a sighting was at, which that's where the ruby red eyes come in, and we have these red eyes of Mothman in Point Pleasant. Now we have ruby red eyes in Chicago, and Oz Park is 13 square miles. So it's like, it's just all over the place.
We had a conversation, Susie, with Steve a few months ago with Sam Moranto, the MUFON person who's a good friend of ours. And he got us really kind of introduced to all of the stuff that was going on with the Chicago reports and all this. And although we believe the reports are very highly suspect, there is a strange undercurrent that underlies all of what's happened. And that's what Jackie's talking about with the numerical coincidences, the reverses of the 13s and the 31s. 31 is very prominent in Chicago. 13 is very prominent in Point Pleasant. But there seems to be some type of a guiding force that's underlying what's going on. And maybe the phenomena is being co-created by the people who are getting involved with it, like John Keel talked about, that it kind of takes on what you expect it to based upon your own belief systems and what you're bringing to the table with the way you research. And my voice is going a little wonky on me. I'm sorry about that. I drank something and it went down my windpipe, and that's why I've been so quiet.
Yeah, that's happened to the best of us on these things. It's funny that you talk about it in that way. A couple of years ago, I kind of had, I guess you could call it paranormal experiences, but mine was in the form of nightmares. And I felt like I was getting like breadcrumbed I'd have this reoccurring nightmare. I'd figure out what something meant in that nightmare, and then I'd have like a weird coincidence in real life. And this went on for over a year, probably close to 2 years. I was like chasing things down to try to figure out what was going on. And this all culminated in me finding the house that the nightmare took place in. And I pulled up to the house, and a shed in the backyard caught on fire. And I said, okay, this isn't good. I'm not getting like good energy from this. I think this is trying to like distract me from something maybe. And I said, I'm not putting any more thought, energy, emotions into this. It's been consuming my life. I'm going to ignore it. Nightmare stopped after I made that decision to not give it any energy or entertain it at all. So I do think that our own thoughts and beliefs can kind of feed into things like that sometimes, whether it's good or bad, I think, because I have had, I would say, the same type of thing happen, but in a positive way. That one just happened to be negative.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard it say that once a phenomena notices that you've noticed it, it starts noticing you. So if you start playing with the phenomena, it starts playing back.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. Absolutely.
I was going to say that
Oh,
Jackie's got a T-shirt from the Mothman Museum, and on the back of the shirt is a saying from John Keel that says the universe does not exist as we think it does, and that we do not exist as we think that we do. And I think human beings are a lot more powerful than we give ourselves credit for. We don't know what we don't know about our own abilities, latent abilities. And I think the ancients had a better clue, in terms of psychic ability or the spiritual universe or what have you. They were much more connected to that powerful reality that we were kind of disconnected from now. And I think it's been done by design through societies and governments and
yes,
and the hidden hand and all this type of thing. But we certainly can manifest different things, both positive and negative, depending upon our focus and our intent.
Yeah, you kind of just struck on one of my passion points. And I feel like, the people that are kind of drawn to the paranormal or what we would call like witchcraft today or paganism, it's just us trying to get back to the point before we were colonized, because white people were colonized too. It was just much longer ago. And I think it's, the way we live now is not natural. It's not how any of us were really meant to live. Some people have an easier time adjusting to that. But I think that when you start to work on like decolonization and, get away from all of that and reconnect with the land that you live on first and foremost. If you like the culture that my ancestors would have been before they were colonized is now gone. So yes, there are ways I can reconnect with that. But for me, what's been more meaningful is reconnecting to the land that I live on. And that's how I've been working on that. But look, to your point, the people at that point had a much better understanding of how the universe works, in my opinion.
And the abilities that we all have, and so many people don't even believe they have that ability.
I was one of those until very recently. I had just so many coincidences. And I even had at one point a TV thrown at me, just completely thrown at me off of my bureau, straight at me. And I'm still through the whole time denying it's paranormal. I was talking to someone earlier. When I was a kid, I had a dream not about the Oklahoma City bombings, but my mother's reaction to it before it happened. And I had experiences where I'd seen things that happened in the past, specifically how the land used to look like in the past. And I just completely would not think of it as any kind of ability or paranormal activity for the longest time.
So when this TV went flying at you, what did you think was happening?
Well, the first thing I did was figure out where my cats were, right? Because I have one that's a little bit spirited. And then I figured I must just not be smart enough to figure out what happened here. that was always my default, is I just don't understand what happens.
Yeah.
That's what I would fall back on all the
I
time.
still do that though. I still scratch my head, and it takes sometimes a couple of days for me to realize that what just happened is not normal. But when we went to Wisconsin, the hotel room light kept switching itself off and on in the vestibule area when you walk in. And it's like we're there for a couple of days before we even realize this thing's shutting itself off and on. And it's like, wait a minute, and it's like, okay, so this is weird. And it wasn't until, it was weird. And I got several videos on my iPad of it going off and on, and nobody's clearly by the switch turning it off and on. And it wasn't weird until we got back home, and the interview that we did in that hotel room, when I went to put it onto YouTube and to start transcription on my iPad where I did the recordings with the light going off and on. After 10 minutes, this interview that's just a guy talking goes into this. Just for the rest of the entire interview. So we always record on several devices because something strange always happens. But when that happened, I'm like, okay, so this is legit. There was something going on with that switch. There was something going on in that room,
Yep. For me, there was multiple things that happened on this one day, but one of the things that I had perceived or seen, I was able to verify was correct afterwards. And I had no idea going in, even what I was walking into. So that one thing I could verify because I had seen it and went home, and I had to make some phone calls, do some research, but eventually I was able to verify it. And then I was like, okay, there's something here. It's not my brain doing something weird.
Yeah.
The interview that Jackie was talking about that we did in central Wisconsin was with Dean Bertram. You know Dean, right?
Yes. Yep.
It was with Dean. Wonderful guy. Fantastic conversation. Had a great time with him. Spent most of the day with him. And Jackie's right. When we first got to the hotel room, there was something strange about it because the light in the bathroom shut itself off while I was in the bathroom. And I got up, turned the light on, and it came back on. But then we heard this click, 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 and it kept going on and off and on and off and on and off. It was just super bizarre. And then all the rest of the interviews, besides the one, or all the rest of the recording devices, except for the one that Jaci was talking about, were perfectly fine. I mean, I listened to and transcribed Dean's entire interview and had no problem, except he has a pretty thick accent. So I had to listen pretty closely. But that one that she had, I mean, it was just really crazy.
Yeah. But so not everyone has these experiences. So from the research you've done and just personal experiences, do you think that, maybe people are like, I used to be, and just in denial about these things or not open to them? Or do some people legitimately experience things and others don't?
So from where I'm sitting, Jaci is the conduit in our odd activities that we see, because I've not really had many of them. I had a couple of things that really probably were more stress related that I experienced some weirdness like 20, 25 years ago. But since we've been together, I've watched her obviously be present during the time we were with Dean. And that was her device that went wonky on us. When she had a legal issue going on within the family, she was really upset one day and a light bulb exploded right next to her. There was another time about a year and a half ago, I had a traumatic back injury and I was sitting in my recliner on morphine tablets and really was pretty much useless. And she was sitting next to our breakfast bar. And what was it that started rolling towards you?
And it was an orange. It rolled like an inch stopped like an inch from my arm. It was like,
Yeah. And so it's a brand new house. We've only been here for like a month before I got hurt. And so everything is lined up. It's all new. So it's not like it was tilted. That the thing wasn't tilted. But this
and
orange
it's stone countertop, so it wasn't like a vibration either that would have moved this orange, because I mean, you can pound on a stone countertop and it's just not going to make things roll. And yeah, that was weird.
And she's had other experiences like family members coming to her in her sleep or in her dreams. I had experienced a loss of a gentleman who passed away from cancer about 15 years ago, and Jaci was in a deep meditative state, and he came to her during the meditation and told her to thank me for what I had done for him. I mean, I've seen, countless things that other people would call, coincidence or what have you, or craziness. And I know she's a very sane person, but I think she's a conduit to this. And Harriet from Bridging the Tragedy is profoundly psychic. And she thinks that Jaci is also.
How do you feel about that, Jaci?
Well, I guess. I mean, Harriet told me my biggest problem is I don't trust myself. And she goes, sometimes you will be wrong because that's just the way it is. And that I just need to trust myself more. So now that I trust myself more, I'm even more demanding with Bill when I say something, listen, because for most of our relationship, he's just kind of like, if it's not his idea, it's not an idea at all. So I learned, pretty quick in our relationship that I had to make it his idea for me to get my way. But after talking with Harriet and realizing like, yeah, I have been in touch and in tune with things my entire life. And I mean, I literally had one time I was 14 years old and I was at a payphone with my best friend in Polo, a little tiny town that I grew up in, and an ambulance went past and headed towards one of the big towns that would have a hospital. And I freaked out and I'm like yelling, Andrea, my sister's in there. My sister's in there. And I threw up. And she's like, no, it can't be your sister. How would I know that even, and she talked me down off the cliff and then, okay, it was just my imagination. I don't know what it was. I don't know why I got physically sick. My sister tried to commit suicide and she was in that ambulance. So I have known all of my life that sometimes I know stuff. And I was also taught most of my life that trust myself. I was always taught that, I'm just not trustworthy or whatever. For some reason, I didn't believe that what I thought or knew or whatever wasn't trustworthy. So, I mean, I grew up in an alcoholic home, so my dad wasn't trustworthy. So I think it was just like something that was attached to all of us because there was no trust in the house, you know? And I mean, we had stuff happening. My very first earliest memory, I think I've told you this before, was when all four of us kids, my brother and two sisters and I, all got up and went to our bedroom doors and looked out our bedroom doors and saw Jesus stand, an apparition of Jesus stand at the end of the hallway. And it's like, not everybody can say that you're seeing that when you're like 3 or 4 years old, you know? It's like, so that was like one of my earliest memories of anything that was just really odd. But our parents told us it didn't happen. So when you're hearing that you can't believe what you're seeing or hearing, or things that are happening in the house, like the door shut and close and shut and close, you know, I mean, open, shut, slam and shut, you know, and being told that, you know, it's the wind or whatever it is, then you kind of just want to believe that you're nuts, that, you know.
Did my lights just?
Yes.
That's never happened
That's
before.
my wife. That's my wife.
So while you're talking about that, so I've done like almost 19 years worth of PTSD therapy, like different types by now. And, you know, one of the things that it just made me think of is like I can tell whose footsteps are coming up the stairs. I can tell when certain people's cars are pulling in, because if you grew up or if you lived in a home where it was a matter of safety to know who was coming up the stairs or pulling in the driveway, you get more sensitive to those things. So, you know, what we're talking about with the paranormal, those are just, you know, if being psychic, as an example, that's possibly just a different sense. So is that something that could, you know, maybe develop, just like I've developed the ability to tell people's footsteps apart? Do you think it's something else like that, perhaps?
I think people can become more aware of their psychic abilities as they grow older, just from learning that they have the ability and that they can trust their abilities. But I think everybody's got, it's an innate thing, I think, that everybody everybody does. I mean, I don't think that any one person can ever say that I've never had a thought and then something happened, or I never saw anything out of the corner of my eye, or whatever, you know. I just don't, I mean, I the doors that were shutting and opening, when I was home alone, I was like so scared in the house by myself. We lived out in the country and it was pitch black and I was scared. I was like in adolescence. And I learned later on in life that I could have been possibly doing that myself. And it's like, that just blows me away. So I literally like look at things like and try to move it. And I'm like screaming in my head for it to move, you know, and I'm like, I don't have the patience to do it as long enough, but I think that you can continue to train yourself.
A couple things occurred to me, Susie, when you asked that question. And the first one was, when a person loses their sight, their other senses pick up the slack.
Yeah.
You can smell better, you can hear better, all these types of things. I was having a conversation a couple of months ago when we were trying to find people to interview for our current book. And I had a conversation with Grant Cameron, and he was talking about how he believes that trauma can shut us down in a way that we are open to more of these extreme possibilities and connect in ways that we don't otherwise. And the way that he talked about it, which makes perfect sense to me, and I think I had this thought as well too before we discussed it, was that anything that shuts down the left brain and opens up the right brain to whatever else is out there is useful. And he had talked about psychedelics or different types of drugs or chemicals. Trauma certainly forces us outside of our comfort zone. And like you mentioned, you have to find different ways to cope when you have an imminent threat that might be within your own family or in your own home. So I think that those things definitely, when we talk about losing one of our senses, that perhaps this psychic ability is just, it's another latent type of an ability that we have, but we don't need it for our direct survival until we do. And once we do, and that's one of the reasons that we wanted to start investigating the relationship between trauma and paranormal activity, because I've always believed that trauma is a gateway to these extreme possibilities that we're not conscious of. I just don't know how or why. And I wanted to investigate, like Jaci had come up with the idea several years ago, that we look at post-traumatic growth, because we're positive people. We don't want to just get into the shock value of things. That's what the paranormal is about for the most part. But what we're trying to do is, let's talk about the shock value, but let's flip it around and see how people have learned to grow and to develop and to thrive, and how they've done so by going through some of these extreme circumstances.
Yeah. So for me personally, I had struggled to find treatments that worked for me. I can't tolerate a lot of medications. It was a little over a year ago that I finally did find something that worked for me. And shortly after that was when I started to become more open to paranormal experiences. I feel like I had, just like you can kind of shut out people emotionally, I feel like I had kind of shut off to the paranormal as well. But the treatment that finally worked for me was ketamine infusions also, which it was life-changing, Bill. It was like turning down the difficulty level on a video game immediately. Like life just got easier.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I could focus on it. I could be a little bit more objective about my own experiences and things like that. But I always wondered if, because, ketamine can be a psychedelic as well. I never got any kind of like visual hallucinations or anything like that when I was doing the treatments. But I always wondered if like the ketamine played a part in opening myself up to that.
Maybe so.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it did. Maybe it shut down that part of you that was on overdrive. You talked about having been through those circumstances 19 years ago, where you had to, listen to the car coming up the driveway to determine who it was, and how you needed to accommodate for the fact that somebody was going to come into the house that could be a threat, and then maybe because you had been in that mindset for as long as you had, probably weren't even conscious of it.
Yeah.
Those defenses were raised up to a certain degree, and then perhaps this medication allowed those to come down in a way you could experience things differently.
I was definitely in fight or flight for an extended period of time. I actually had I had vagus nerve damage because of it and started having health problems.
Mm.
So, yeah. I actually 2 weeks ago got an MRI, and it's actually getting better.
Good.
Instead of worse. So
good.
That's good news.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very good.
Yeah. And I've had all of these really cool experiences over the summer since then. So
like what?
Well, so I'll tell you what kind of started it is I alluded to it earlier. I had someone I was friends with on Facebook. I'm not even sure how we became friends, but that was the only way we knew each other. He had commented on one of my posts, "Oh, you should go to this location. I want to see, what you think about it. Tell me what kind of vibes you pick up on there." And it was a place called it's the Great Swamp Massacre Monument. And it's a monument to the Narragansett tribe who was massacred by the Puritans during King Philip's War. Long story short.
Yeah.
So I go out. It's only, I think it's like an hour and 20 minutes from me. So it was not that far. So I went out I think the next weekend after he had suggested it. And I get there. You have to walk about half a mile through a swamp to get to it. And the first thing was there was an absolute swarm of deer flies. When I tell you I was covered in deer fly bites, I was covered in deer fly bites. Like my clothes got tight because of how much I was swollen. Like it was an absolute swarm. I wasn't even sure. I almost turned around at one point. I'm like, no, I drove all the way out here. I'm going to go. So I finally get to it, and it's an obelisk in the middle of the woods, basically, just a small clearing. There's an obelisk and then 4 cornerstones. And there is a cornerstone for each colony that was involved. So there's Plymouth, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. And I kind of get there, and I'm taking some pictures and videos. The first thing that happened is my digital camera, the battery drained. So I said, okay, I haven't used this in a while. Let me just pop a new battery in. I'm sure it's nothing. And so I'm kind of, going around taking pictures, taking videos. And I noticed that if I was near the Rhode Island stone, the deer flies would leave me alone. And it was significant enough for that to stick in my head and then mention it to the person that told me I should go there later. And it turns out that's where his father's ashes are.
Wow.
Was at that stone. So I'm kind of new at talking about this. I'm used to other people telling me their experiences. Bear with me. But I had put my hand on a tree, and I had, the best way I can describe it is like a download. Like I just kind of knew and kind of like got a picture in my brain that where the monument was not where the massacre happened. And I could tell directionally from where I was, like what direction and where the location of the actual monument, the actual massacre had happened. And that was what I was saying earlier. I was able to verify that was accurate later on after I left. And another thing I saw was a man who was like standing on the edge of a frozen lake, and he was talking to people, and they were trying to figure out how they were going to take care of all the dead. I saw 2 little kids huddled together, freezing to death in the snow because this had happened in December. So, aside from all the people that died in the actual attack, there are people that died afterwards from kind of like the aftermath of it. So that was like a pretty intense thing. And again, at the time, I'm still half in denial about like, is this is an emotional place? Is my brain just making this up? So when I left there, I was completely wiped out. Just went home. I kind of looked through my videos real quick, and went to bed. And the next day, I got up. I was going to put together a YouTube video to talk about my experiences there. And all of the videos on my digital camera were just black screens. So I said, all right, I guess that, that camera's battery died yesterday. So I guess it's garbage now, right? Then I had also taken pictures and videos on my cell phone. So I got my cell phone out. I'm like, at least I have those. Those are all black also. So the other part of this is, when I had kind of gotten those, we'll call it visions, I had wanted to do a little bit more research. It turns out the person who instigated the attack was my 9th great uncle. And the person who had told me I should go there is, a descendant of people that were massacred there as well. And he did not know that. And I kind of said, like, why did you tell me to go there? And he said, it was my higher power told me to tell you.
How about that? Boy, does that resonate with us or not?
Yeah.
Tell her, please.
Well, so when my mom died, we had her service, and then we had a luncheon afterwards. And my mom's cousin, the youngest cousin, so she's closer to my age, said, she asked me if I believed in the cornstalk curse. And I said, well, I think there's probably something to it. And she said, well, I'm really into genealogy. And I said, yeah. And she said, so Benjamin Weddell was her 6th great uncle. And he was part of the infantry that took out Cornstalk. So not uncle, grandfather. I'm sorry. So he would be my 7th great grandfather, which when we first went to Point Pleasant, we met Lynn Cornwell Robinson, who was the 7th fire from Chief Cornstalk. So here's her on one side and me on the other. And I'm not proud of it by any means. I'll tell you that. Literally, the last time I went to Point Pleasant, I was looking for Weddell's name anywhere I could find it to make sure that he didn't do any damage himself. He was just part of the infantry. He wasn't recognized for any of it. I'm sure he did his own damage, but yeah, so I totally get that. And I almost feel responsible for the death of Cornstalk because it's in my lineage.
Well, yeah, the other similarity there is my 9th grade uncle, that was not the only thing he was involved in. In the Bridgewater Triangle, there is a theory that that area of high strangeness is caused by something called the Wampum Belt Curse. And during King Philip's War, after King Philip had been killed, a man named Chief Anawan had taken over. A man named Benjamin Church finally tracked down Anawan, told him, if you surrender peacefully, go to Plymouth with me. We won't kill you. You'll be spared. And Anawan said, yep, no problem. And he also handed over his wampum belt, which was, a sacred piece to the Wampanoag tribe. When he got to Plymouth, Benjamin Church had to business somewhere else. He had to leave for a few days. While he was gone, they whenever you read it, it says the officials in Plymouth basically said, yeah, we know this guy said we weren't going to kill you, but we decided we are anyway. And they beheaded him. They put his head on a pike. This story kind of grabbed my attention. I was looking into Bridgewater Triangle stuff. There's a place called Anawan's Rock that's known to be haunted. And I kept saying, like, why does it just say the officials? Like, I want to know the name of the monster that did this. Ended up going to Boston Library, going through all of these old documents. It was my 9th grade uncle that did it.
Wow.
And I've also met the descendants of people he killed as well. I happened to meet one in a store, and we happened to just strike up this conversation that led to us figuring that out as well.
Wow.
Yeah. And maybe I watched Scooby-Doo too much as a kid, but when these coincidences happen, I feel like I'm supposed to do something. It's not always clear what that is, but I feel like I'm getting this information for a reason, right?
So when we met Carolyn Harris, and we also met Mark Griffith, and he was in the restaurant with Carolyn. And let me back up for just a second. So Jackie was talking about how if it's not my idea, I don't want to do it. And after 20 years together, I've gotten a little bit better at that. But in 2016, when we arrived in Point Pleasant, it was after 5 o'clock. And 8 years ago, Point Pleasant was a lot quieter than it is now. There's a lot more going on now as the legend has just really taken off. But we were looking at the whole area, and Jackie noticed this little old lady in a restaurant, and she said to me, I think she wants to talk to us. And I just kind of poo-pooed the whole idea. Let's go see what else is, going on down the street or whatever. And she said, no, she wants to talk to us. So it was almost like she had to grab my arm to get me to go in the restaurant. But we met Mark Griffith, and Mark is the first person we interviewed for Bridging the Tragedy. And the second or third time we went back to the restaurant, Lynn was there. Lynn Cornwell Robinson was there. In fact, when we pulled up to the restaurant, we saw the license plate and it said Cornstalk on it. And I'm like, oh boy, something about Chief Cornstalk's going on. So we went in there, and this lady who was waiting tables was Mark's half sister. And she called Carolyn mom, even though Carolyn wasn't her mom. She just kind of ascribed that to Carolyn because Carolyn was such a sweet lady. But Lynn was very nice to us the very first time that we were there. And she was a little cooler the next time we went. And then she just kind of started ghosting us and didn't seem to really want to have anything to do with us until she saw that we were in town interviewing Mark, and we put that up on Facebook. So she sent me a message on Messenger. She said, "What are y'all doing?" And it said, "We're working on a book right now. We're interviewing people for that. Mark is one of them. Would you be interested?" And she totally ghosted me. And I wonder if now that Jackie has found out about her ancestry, that perhaps at some level Lynn sensed that too, that there was something about us that was threatening to her. I don't know. Maybe I'm grasping at straws, but it seems like that is a possibility.
So I think you should have listened to Jackie the first time.
Thank you.
I'm better at it now. I'm not good, but I'm better.
Yeah. Moral of the story: listen to Jackie. Will you, Bill?
Yep. I do now more probably, wouldn't you say, honey, than I ever have in the past, but maybe
Yes.
still not that good.
Yes. Not yes. Yes. I'll just say yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So the book that you're working on now gets more into the link between trauma and the paranormal. Any idea when that's going to be coming out?
Yeah, we're really excited about it. The goal is to debut it at the next Mothman Festival. We talked to Jeff the last day we were in Point Pleasant after the festival this year, and we were telling him how things were coming along, and he was asking us about it. And he said, "Why don't you guys come here and debut it? You can talk about that at the next festival." So that kind of, it kind of crystallizes where we were wanting to go with this anyway. Now we have a date that's kind of set in stone, which means the book has to be done by August to be ready for the festival in September. So we've done, I think we've done 7 interviews so far. We'll probably do at least that many more. And life has been so crazy this year. Jackie mentioned she lost her mom at the end of April, the end of May, and my dad passed away last month. So we've had both of those family tragedies to deal with here this year. And she's retired from corporate America, but I'm not. So I'm working a day job in addition to writing this. So at this point, I do think it's doable, but we're going to have to really ramp up getting out there and interviewing more people as quickly as we can. And we've got enough people to do the study. We need around 12. And I think we have more than that already. But yeah, Mothman Festival next year, we should be able to debut it and present it at the festival.
Excellent. I'm looking forward to that for sure.
I am too. I'm looking forward to getting the other interviews done and getting some of them transcribed completely.
Yeah. And Susie, just real quick about that. So far, we have a mix of people who from our everyday walk that we've just run into that we've gotten to know over the years. We met a lady by the name of Jaci who we interviewed. She was at a presentation we did in Woodstock, Illinois, which is suburban Chicago, last summer. And we interviewed her. She was one of our first interviewees, and she has really taken off. She's doing different conferences every weekend now in different areas, within our region. But then we interviewed Reverend Michael Carter from
yeah.
History Channel. Mm-hmm. Wonderful, wonderful conversation. He was fantastic. What a great guy. We interviewed him. Dean Bertram is another one. I'm in the process right now and close to halfway done transcribing an interview we did with Monroe Nevels. And Monroe was a guy who was part of the Rendlesham Forest incident, 1980 in England.
I knew I recognized the name.
Yeah. The most highly documented military UFO experience in history. And I would love to get Jim Peniston also. We know Jim. He's kind of a friend of ours, but he's kind of keeping this whole thing at arm's length right now because probably some of the trauma he's gone through just by telling his story. So we've got some really cool people lined up to interview here. Melanie Kirchdorfer is one who was an experiencer from the 60s. She's in Massachusetts. So I think I asked you a couple months ago how close you were to where she was, because we hope to be out there maybe as soon as next month to interview her. So
we're not going there in December.
It's exciting. Next month is November.
We're not, maybe November. We'll see.
We've got like 2 days next week that are nice. And then after that, just wait till spring.
That's how I feel. Because I want to, if we're going to Massachusetts, I'm going to Salem. You're not going to stop me from going to Salem. And I want to spend a couple of days there, so.
I can tell you the cool, less known places to visit in the area too.
I
when
would
you
love that. I would love that.
Well, you can be our tour guide. You're pretty close to there.
Yep. Bring some hiking boots, because all the cool places I know are in the woods.
Yeah,
Ooh.
I can still walk.
All right. So where can do you guys have a website? Where can people keep up with you, see what you're doing, get in touch with you?
Our
Go ahead,
website is prpconnect.org. The website, I have to be honest, is not in the best condition. And I keep apologizing for it because I keep thinking I'm going to be able to get in there and fix some of the problems. But too much has been going on. And like, that's the least. I mean, just to put our events up there, you know, that our upcoming events, and then the podcast, when we get the links to them, we put those up. But that's about it for now. So yeah, or else you could contact us through email at prpconnect@outlook.com.
And we're also both very active on Facebook. It's easy to find us.
That's where I bother you. So.
Likewise.
Never a bother.
All right. Well, thank you for talking to me. You got a lot of personal information out of me, so congratulations on accomplishing that.
All I had to do was ask.
All right. Thanks everyone for watching, and I will put links to Jaci and Bill's information in the description if anyone needs to reach out to them. And again, thanks everyone for watching, and have a good night.
Thanks, Susie.
Thank you.